Alongside battling enemies and overcoming tricky boss fights, solving puzzles is another main way that players are challenged in video games. The best and most rewarding puzzles will always nudge players in the right direction and have a solution which makes sense within the rules of the game. However, there are other puzzles out there which offer no such courtesies. To reach the answers to these brain benders, players will need to wrestle with some of the most obtuse and abstract logic ever conceived, or possess an in-depth knowledge of a niche subject. Thankfully, online walkthroughs now exist, which, given how bizarre some of these puzzles are, is pretty much essential for a lot of players. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video game puzzles that stopped everyone. Number 10. Waiting for a cloud to move. Braid, 2008. Coming from the mind of Jonathan Blow, the same developer behind the brain-bending puzzle game The Witness, Braid is a fascinating title that used its central time rewinding mechanic to form the basis of ingenious platforming puzzles, alongside weaving a fairy tale story that was just as perplexing as everything else in the game. The hardest of platforming conundrums, however, was collecting hidden stars that you could find located throughout the game. Obtaining any of them was a fiendishly challenging task that demanded mastery of the game's mechanics alongside solving cryptic levels that were borderline cruel. It'd be easy to miss any of these stars without a guide pointing you in the right direction, but the most elusive was the one located in level 2-2. All you actually have to do here is wait for a cloud to travel to you, jump on that cloud, and then ride it to where you can hop over a wall on the other side. When the cloud takes literal hours to get to its destination though, most players won't even realize the piece of the scenery is moving. Thankfully, it only takes finding 7 of the 8 stars to unlock Braid's secret ending. Number 9. Show Your Humanity. Dark Souls 3, 2016. Alongside their crushing levels of difficulty, the Soulsborne games are also known for being especially obtuse. Not only does the Dark Souls trilogy refuse to offer any guidance when it comes to puzzles, but the answers are often as incomprehensible as the series' lore. One of the most bizarre comes in Dark Souls 3's Ringed City DLC, when players stumble upon text on a statue that reads, "Show Your Humanity." Found near the city street's bonfire, those familiar with the first game in the trilogy will recognize humanity as the tool used to reverse hollowing. Therefore, they may logically assume that the game wants them to use an ember, this game's version of humanity. Doing so, though, does nothing. What the game expects players to do is venture into the nearby swamp and use either a young white branch or cast the chameleon spell. Normally, using these items transforms the character into a nearby object. Stand in the correct spot, though, and the ashen one will turn into a giant humanity icon. Glide back to the statue, and a ladder will appear. With no logic as to why this puzzle works the way it does, it's fair enough that players sort out a guide in most cases. Number 8. The Goat. Broken Sword Shadow of the Templars. A puzzle so notorious it has its own Wikipedia page, this aggravating brainbender from 90s point-and-click adventure game Broken Sword Shadow of the Templars tasks protagonist George Stobart with sneaking into an Irish castle. Unfortunately for him, the entrance is guarded by an irritable goat who'll ram George every time he gets too close. By this point in the game, players will have already chased down a terrorist dressed as a clown and solved some tricky ciphers, so a goat really shouldn't be a problem. However, each time players direct George to move towards some handily placed farm equipment at the other side of the courtyard, the goat would ram them. Although it seemed like doing anything without being interrupted by the animal was impossible, the only way to solve this puzzle was to let George be hit while approaching the machinery. The only puzzle in the game to require specific timing to complete, you would have to interact with the machinery before the goat got back. Its rope would subsequently get caught in the machinery when it next attacked, allowing George to pass. Mercifully, the timing element was removed from this puzzle for the remaster. Number 7. The Shakespeare Anthology Puzzle. Silent Hill 3. Solving puzzles has always been a core part of survival horror games, in which players will spend large chunks of their time hunting for strange keys and solving logic problems in between fighting monsters. One of the most infamous examples comes right at the start of Silent Hill 3, where players are tasked with finding a 4-digit code to open a door in a bookstore. To get the code, they'll need to place volumes of Shakespeare anthologies on a shelf in the correct order, using the numbers on their spines to unlock the door. Although cracking this code is straightforward on easier difficulties, the real headache comes when tackling this on the hardest riddle setting. With the clue now being a list of obscure quotes from the bard's works, Solving not only requires an in-depth knowledge of Shakespeare's writing to identify which play each line is from, but it also meant that players would need to know which anthology that play was a part of as well. Even with the books in the right order, the solution involved solving another riddle by multiplying the numbers on the spines to get the final code. Also, let's be clear, unless you didn't catch it earlier, this was only the first puzzle. Number 6. The Gnome's Name, King's Quest 1984. At one point in 1984 adventure game King's Quest, players will encounter an old gnome who says he has something useful for them. Instead of just handing it over though, he demands that players guess their name within 3 attempts. Given that this riddle is a reference to Rumpelstiltskin, it'd be fair enough that you'd assume that's the answer. Unfortunately, you'd be incorrect. A note in a witch's house earlier in the game, reading, "Sometimes it's wise to think backwards," sheds some light on the answer. But instead of typing the name in reverse like the hint suggests, the developers expected players to figure out that they were supposed to invert the entire alphabet to use as a cipher in which A is Z and so on. Using this illogical method, the gnome's name becomes, and wait for it, IFNKOVHGROGHPRM. Making this puzzle even more difficult, as if it needed to be even more difficult, the developers accidentally made a typo by switching the E and the L around, so even if you did manage to pull this off, you'd still get it wrong. Number 5. The Mountain Door, Tunic, 2022. Despite featuring an adorable anthropomorphic fox as its hero, Tunic is far from a cutesy adventure game. Much like the Dark Souls series, this title leaves it up to players to figure out how everything works, with the most baffling challenge being to open the door at the top of the mountain by discovering what the game calls the Golden Path. The solution to this puzzle can be found within the pages of a virtual game manual that's written in its own unique language, specifically on a page containing numbers on a golden grid. These numbers refer to pages in the manual that have yellow lines hidden within them. Find all the lines, one of which involves quitting and reloading the game to find a secret save file containing the lines laid out in a maze, and match them to where they belong on the grid to unveil the golden path. Players must then note down each direction the line takes and convert them into button presses on the D-pad. Once completed, they can now stand in front of the door and input, wait for it, the gigantic 100 button combination to unlock it. The bigger question here is how anybody managed to figure this one out on their own. Number 4. Stealing the Gold Belt Buckle, Discworld, 1995. Whether it's the infamous rubber duck puzzle in The Longest Journey or attempting to get the babblefish from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy game, puzzle games have a terrible habit of operating on their own bonkers logic. No puzzle, however, is as insane as trying to steal the gold belt buckle in Discworld. At this point in the game, the player is required to steal gold items throughout the map to give to a dragon. One of these items is a fishmonger's golden belt buckle. However, the merchant is understandably unwilling to just hand over their possession. Therefore, players must find a crafty way to rob them of their treasure. Rather than tricking the fishmonger into handing over the buckle, the steps to obtain it are ludicrously nonsensical. Before players can swipe the belts, they first need to steal an octopus and some aphrodisiac custard. Next, tie the octopus in a string and place it in a toilet before covering it in the custard. Finally, place some prunes in the fishmonger's caviar, which will cause him to run to the toilet, where he'll be assaulted by the lustful octopus, allowing his belt to be taken. Only video games would arrive at this level of absurd logic. Number 3. Stopping the Waterfall, Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge. Containing insult sword fighting, rubber chickens, and dozens of quippy one-liners, the beloved Monkey Island games are known for their signature sense of silly humor. Unfortunately for fans of the cult series, though, the wacky comedy could make some of the puzzles far harder than they should have been, with the most frustrating of all being the waterfall puzzle from the second game. During his quest to defeat the villainous pirate LeChuck for the second time, Guybrush needed to turn off a waterfall so he could reach the house of Rum Rogers. But with no tool for the job available for purchase at any of the game's shops, players needed to get inventive when finding the solution. However, nobody was expecting the writers of the Monkey Island series to go this overboard with their video game logic. What players needed to do to stop the waterfall was place a banana on a metronome in front of a piano-playing monkey. This would then hypnotize the primate, which Guybrush could then use as a literal monkey wrench on the pump. While this puzzle did demonstrate the comedic writing that the franchise is famous for, these steps were absolutely not obvious to arrive at this punny punchline. Number 2. The Mantras Puzzle, La-Mulana. Originally released in Japan in 2006 before the remake introduced the game to the West in 2012, La-Mulana is a challenging adventure outing inspired by classic Metroidvanias. In it, players take on the role of archaeologist Lemesa Kosugi as he explores the titular ruins in search of ancient treasures. Alongside perilous traps and dangerous enemies, you'll also need to contend with some pretty tricky puzzles as you move forward through the game. While there are plenty of difficult challenges in this game, the most perplexing is the mantras puzzle, which players will need to complete to reach the final boss. This riddle involves finding 8 mantras and chanting them in order at specific spots. However, finding these exact locations isn't exactly clear. The best method for finding where to perform these chants comes from the game's manual, which suggests each level should be plotted as a map of 4x5 squares for both its front and back sides. Starting from the compass room, players need to trace the directions to get to the boss room on the front side and then retrace this same path on the back to pinpoint the correct location. As far as obtuse game puzzles go, this one is definitely one of the worst. Number 1. Getting a fake mustache. Gabriel Knight 3, Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned. Another maligned puzzle with its own Wikipedia page, what's become known as the cat hair mustache puzzle from point-and-click title Gabriel Knight 3 is another example of illogical video game design that the developers expected players to understand. Early in the game, players are tasked with disguising our titular supernatural investigator as one Detective Mosley. Despite the real Mosley not having any facial hair, part of this puzzle requires Knight to source a fake mustache to complete their makeshift costume. Procuring this accessory, however, requires players to complete a series of convoluted steps, beginning with sticking some tape to the bottom of a shed door. Next, a nearby cat needs to be sprayed with water, which causes it to run under the door to catch some of its fur on the tape. After retrieving the homemade mustache, maple syrup is used to glue it onto Knight's face. Lastly, to make the costume as authentic as possible, you need to draw a fake mustache onto the stolen passport of the real Mosley. You know, because he doesn't have a mustache. Added into the game after another puzzle was axed for budgetary reasons, this setup was just as despised by the developers, and was only kept in because there wasn't enough time to replace it. That's the end of our list. Do let me know down in that comment section which video game puzzle stumped you. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.